"I choose you as her father," the Apache woman whispered to the lonely farmer. The sun rose slowly over the small settlement, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. The wind carried a faint smell of sage and dry earth, and the only sound was the low clatter of horses in the distance. In the center of this quiet, a small farm stood alone on the edge of the plains. The house was modest, built from sun-bleached wood and stone, with a small garden out front and a few animals wandering nearby. This was the home of a man who had spent much of his life working the land, a man who lived quietly and alone. He was a farmer in his mid-30s, tall and strong from years of hard labor, his hands calloused and skin weathered from sun and wind. He woke before dawn every day, even in the bitter cold of winter, to tend to his fields. Corn, beans, and squash grew in neat rows, and he spent hours watering and weeding, listening only to the soft whisper of the wind through the grasses. Life was hard and simple. He had no wife, no children, and no family left to share his days. The loneliness of the farm pressed on him more than the work itself, though he seldom admitted it, even to himself. Despite the quiet, he found small joys in his routine. He liked the feel of soil in his hands, the gentle weight of a basket of freshly picked vegetables, and the soft sounds of birds at dawn. But at night, when he sat by the fire after a long day, the silence seemed louder than ever. The house felt empty, and the vast expanse of land around him reminded him of all he had lost and all he had never known. One morning, as he worked to repair a fence that had been damaged in the previous night's windstorm, he noticed movement in the distance. A group of figures appeared along the ridge, moving carefully across the hills. They were Apache women and children, traveling together, their dark hair and colorful clothing catching the morning sun. The farmer paused, resting his hands on the wooden posts he had been fixing, and watched quietly. He had seen Apache people before, but never this close, and never alone on his land. He felt a mixture of curiosity and caution. As he observed, a small girl separated from the group. She stumbled on a loose stone and fell, her small cry reaching him even from a distance. Without thinking, the farmer set down his tools and ran toward her. His boots kicked up dust as he approached, and he held out a hand to help her to her feet. The girl looked at him with wide, fearful eyes, but she did not run. There was something in his gaze, calm and gentle, that seemed to tell her she was safe. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, unsure if she would understand. She nodded, her small fingers brushing against the hem of her dress. She spoke a few words in Apache, but he did not understand. Still, her tone was not angry or frightened, it carried trust. The farmer smiled slightly and offered her some water from the flask he carried. She took it carefully, her small hands trembling, and sipped quietly. Over the next few days, the farmer continued his work while keeping an eye on the group. The little girl appeared again, this time closer to his fields. He noticed how she watched him work, her eyes bright with curiosity. Though they did not speak the same language, he began to find ways to communicate with her. A simple gesture, a nod, or a smile became their shared language. She started to bring small gifts, a bright feather, a smooth stone, to leave near the edge of his garden. He, in turn, gave her pieces of bread or fruit. Their bond grew slowly, quietly, without words. The farmer found himself looking forward to her visits, noticing the way her hair shone in the sun, or the small laugh she made when he offered her a piece of apple. He began to imagine her life, her family, and the hardships she must face traveling through the hills and plains. His heart, so long accustomed to solitude, felt a gentle warmth he had not known for years. The Apache woman, the girl's mother, watched from a distance at first. She was wary of the farmer, cautious because she had seen too much in her life: broken promises, harsh words, and mistrust between settlers and her people. Yet she also observed how he cared for her daughter. He never raised his voice, never made sudden movements, and never demanded anything from the child. There was kindness in his eyes and respect in his actions. Slowly, she began to trust him, though she kept her distance, waiting to see if his intentions were genuine. As the days turned into weeks, small moments began to build between them. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled over the plains. Dark clouds covered the sky, and rain fell in heavy sheets. The little girl had been playing near the edge of the farmer's property when the first drops fell. He ran to her, scooping her up into his arms, and carried her to the safety of his barn. There, they waited out the storm. She clung to him, shivering, and he wrapped his coat around her shoulders. The mother arrived shortly after, soaked from the rain, her eyes filled with gratitude and concern. "You have a good heart," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the pounding rain. He nodded, unsure if she expected a reply. The words themselves were enough. From that day, he realized the bond he felt with the girl and her mother was more than fleeting. It was growing into something important, something that could change his life forever. In the evenings, after the work was done and the animals fed, he would sit by the fire, thinking about the girl's laughter, her bright eyes, and the gentle presence of her mother nearby. He began to imagine a life that was not entirely alone, a life where laughter and care filled the empty spaces in his home. Though the road ahead was uncertain, he felt hope stir within him, a feeling he had long forgotten in the harsh rhythm of farm life. The girl began to follow him more willingly, staying close as he worked in the fields or repaired fences. She learned the small routines of the farm, imitating his movements and trying to help in her small way. He taught her how to gather herbs, feed the chickens, and carry small baskets without spilling the contents. Every day, he felt the walls of loneliness around him break down a little more, replaced with warmth, companionship, and a sense of purpose. By the end of the month, the farmer and the little girl shared a bond that needed no words. He could sense her moods, her fears, and her joys through the smallest gestures. She looked up to him, not just as a helper or friend, but as someone who cared deeply for her. And he, in turn, began to feel a responsibility, a protective instinct he had never known he could have. The Apache woman continued to watch quietly, her heart softening as she observed the farmer's patience and gentle guidance. She had seen many men in her life, some cruel, some indifferent, but this man, this quiet farmer, showed a strength that was not loud or forceful. He had a heart that could nurture, protect, and provide. She began to imagine a life where her daughter could grow safely, learning from both her people and the kindness of this man. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, the woman approached him. She kept her gaze steady, her steps slow and deliberate. The little girl ran ahead, playing in the fading light, unaware of the seriousness of the moment. The farmer looked up as she stopped in front of him, and for a brief moment, they simply regarded each other. There was a quiet understanding in her eyes, a recognition of the bond he had formed with her daughter and the trust she could place in him. Without speaking immediately, she watched the little girl, seeing how she smiled and laughed freely in his presence. She knew that the child's future could be brighter, safer, and full of care if he remained a part of her life. In that quiet moment, the farmer understood that this was the beginning of something profound. Not only had he found companionship in the little girl, but he had also begun to earn the trust of her mother. His life, once quiet and lonely, was opening to a new chapter, a chapter that promised connection, responsibility, and the possibility of a family he had never imagined he could have. And so, under the soft glow of the setting sun, a bond formed quietly and steadily between the lonely farmer, the little Apache girl, and her watchful mother. It was the start of a story that would change all their lives, a story of trust, care, and the slow building of a family chosen not by circumstance, but by heart. The days that followed the storm brought a quiet rhythm to the farm. The little girl, whose name was Ayana, began to come more often, moving confidently along the paths the farmer had worn through his fields. She would help him carry baskets of vegetables, gather eggs from the chicken coop, or simply sit beside him as he worked, watching the soil turn under his hands. Each day, the farmer felt the emptiness in his home fade just a little, replaced by laughter, movement, and the soft voice of a child who trusted him completely. The Apache woman, Ayana's mother, remained near but cautious. Her name was Naeli, and she carried herself with a quiet strength that spoke of years spent surviving in a world often harsh and unforgiving. She watched the interactions between the farmer and her daughter, noting his gentle hands, his soft tone, and the care with which he taught Ayana. Naeli had learned long ago that trust was not given lightly, and yet, watching the way he treated her child, she began to feel a hope she had almost forgotten. One morning, the farmer found Ayana sitting by the fence, her small hands clasped around a smooth stone she had found near the river. She looked up at him with wide, curious eyes, and he smiled. "Good morning, Ayana," he said. She smiled back, tilting her head, and spoke a few words in her language. Though he did not understand the words, the tone was friendly and warm, and he nodded, encouraging her to continue. She picked up another stone, pointing to it and then to the ground, as if showing him something important. The farmer watched patiently, trying to understand her gestures. Slowly, he realized she was showing him which stones were the best for marking the edges of the field, a small lesson in observation that she had learned from her mother. He nodded again, impressed by her sharp eyes and careful attention. "You are very clever," he said, offering her a piece of bread. She accepted it eagerly, her smile brightening as the morning sun warmed the farm. Over the next several weeks, their routine became a comfortable pattern. Yana would arrive in the morning, helping with chores and exploring the farm, while the farmer went about his work. In the evenings, she would return to her mother, and Nayeli would watch from a distance, observing how her daughter's face lit up with joy and excitement in the farmer's company. She began to realize that he was teaching more than chores. He was teaching patience, responsibility, and kindness. One afternoon, a small accident tested the bond that was forming. Yana was climbing a low tree to reach a nest she had spotted when her foot slipped, and she cried out as she fell to the ground. The farmer was at her side in an instant, lifting her gently into his arms. He checked her carefully for injuries, speaking softly to calm her fears. Nayeli arrived shortly after, her face pale with worry. Seeing that Yana was unharmed and that the farmer had been careful, her tension eased slightly. "You are very careful with her," Nayeli said quietly, her voice carrying relief and gratitude. He nodded, understanding her meaning even without words. That day, he realized that the responsibility of caring for a child, even temporarily, was more than physical. It required attention, patience, and an understanding heart. He felt a deep sense of purpose, a commitment he had never known in his quiet life. As the days grew longer and warmer, the farmer began to notice how Ayana's presence changed him. Tasks that had once felt monotonous now carried a sense of companionship. He found himself smiling more often, laughing at her small jokes, and feeling a quiet satisfaction when she learned something new. The once lonely farm was becoming a place of warmth, energy, and small joys that filled every corner of the home. Nayeli began to approach him cautiously, speaking in simple words, her voice soft and deliberate. She asked questions about the land, about his work, and about how he cared for her daughter. He answered as best he could, careful to show honesty and respect. Over time, small conversations grew into longer talks, and trust began to form. She could see that he was not only kind, but capable of understanding and respecting the life and culture her daughter came from. One evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, Nayeli came to the farm alone. She stood at the edge of the garden, watching the farmer and Yana as they worked together to repair a small gate. When the task was complete, she stepped forward, her voice quiet but steady. "Thank you," she said simply, her words carrying more meaning than he could grasp at the moment. He nodded, offering a small smile, sensing the importance of her visit. The weeks passed, and the relationship between the three of them deepened. The farmer began to learn about Apache customs through Ayana, who shared small stories, songs, and traditions. He listened carefully, asking questions and showing interest, demonstrating respect for her heritage. Nayeli observed this with growing approval, seeing that he was willing to embrace not just her child, but her culture as well. One day, while tending the fields, the farmer noticed Ayana struggling with a heavy basket of vegetables. He rushed to help, lifting the basket and setting it gently on the ground. She looked up at him, her small face showing gratitude, and he felt a surge of protectiveness. He realized that he wanted to ensure her safety and happiness, not just for a day or a week, but for all the days that followed. The mother and child were slowly becoming a part of his life in ways he had never imagined. He found himself thinking about them during quiet moments, planning how to make the farm safer and more welcoming, and imagining what it would be like to share meals and evenings together. The loneliness that had once been so familiar was fading, replaced by anticipation, hope, and a sense of responsibility that gave his life new meaning. However, not all moments were easy. Some neighbors watched with suspicion, whispering about the dangers of settlers and Apache people forming connections. There were times when the farmer felt the weight of judgment, knowing that others might not understand his actions. But each time he looked at Ayana and Nayeli, he felt a resolve that outweighed fear. The bond he had formed was real, and he would protect it. One quiet afternoon, as the wind rustled through the fields, Naeli approached him with a small basket of herbs and berries. She spoke slowly, pointing to the basket and then to herself, then to the farmer. He nodded, understanding her intention, to share food and knowledge, to invite him into her world in a small but meaningful way. Together, they prepared the herbs, talking in gestures, smiles, and simple words. In these moments, the silence that had once filled the farm was replaced by cooperation, laughter, and shared effort. The connection between the three of them was becoming undeniable. Yana's laughter echoed across the fields, bright and pure, while the farmer felt a sense of belonging he had never known. Naeli watched closely, seeing that he was more than a caretaker. He was a protector, a teacher, and someone who could offer stability in a world that was often uncertain and dangerous. As the sun set on another day, the farmer found himself reflecting on how much had changed. His life had once been quiet and lonely, defined by routine and solitude. Now, each day brought new challenges, joys, and responsibilities. He was learning the meaning of care, trust, and the quiet strength required to support another life. And as he looked at Ayana's smiling face and Naeli's watchful eyes, he felt the first real stirrings of a family forming, not by blood, but by choice, trust, and shared hearts. The days that followed would continue to test him, to teach him, and to shape the bond between them. But in this moment, in the warm light of a fading afternoon, he understood that his life had changed forever. The empty farm was no longer just a place of work. It was becoming a home, filled with laughter, learning, and the beginning of a connection that would define all their futures. The farm settled into a quiet rhythm, but life was never entirely simple. The farmer, whose name was Thomas, continued his work in the fields, tending crops and livestock with care. Yet his thoughts were increasingly filled with Ayana and her mother, Naeli. He had grown to love the child's presence and had come to respect Naeli deeply, realizing that trust was something precious, built slowly and carefully. Each day offered small lessons in patience, understanding, and responsibility, and Thomas embraced them all. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Thomas noticed smoke rising in the distance. It was faint, curling up from the woods where settlers often passed. Immediately, his instincts sharpened. He called to Ayana to stay close, and made sure she was behind him as he approached the ridge to see the source of the smoke. From his vantage point, he saw a small group of travelers, armed and wary, moving through the woods. Their eyes were suspicious, and Thomas felt the weight of his decision to care for an Apache child more keenly than ever. The frontier was a dangerous place, and trust was fragile. Later that day, while tending the livestock, Thomas noticed Ayana staring into the distance, her small hands gripping the wooden fence tightly. "What is it, Ayana?" he asked gently. She shook her head and spoke softly in Apache. Though he did not understand the words, her tone conveyed concern. Thomas knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. He did not need words to understand. She was sensing danger, the unease of the land and the wary eyes of travelers. That evening, Naeli arrived, carrying Ayana in her arms. She had noticed the same travelers and had decided it was time to speak to Thomas seriously. Sitting by the fire, she explained the risks they faced, that some settlers might not understand their relationship, that prejudice could lead to conflict, and that Ayana's safety had to come first. Thomas listened intently, nodding with solemn understanding. He realized that the life he had chosen, caring for a child and earning the trust of her mother, was not without challenges. Yet he felt a steady resolve. Over the next weeks, Thomas worked to make the farm safer. He repaired fences, reinforced the barn, and kept a closer eye on the boundaries of his land. Yana helped where she could, learning from him how to notice subtle signs in the environment. Broken branches that could indicate animals or humans passing, footprints in the soil, and the sound of wind moving through the trees. Through these small lessons, she grew more aware, more confident, and more connected to both her surroundings and the farmer who guided her. Despite the dangers and challenges, their bond continued to grow. Thomas began to notice small things about Naeli that drew him in. She carried herself with quiet strength, her gaze calm but sharp, always observing, always protective. Her gestures were deliberate, and her voice, though soft, commanded attention. He admired how she interacted with Ayana, balancing care with guidance, love with discipline. Slowly, he found himself seeing Naeli not just as a mother, but as a partner in the shared responsibility of keeping her daughter safe and happy. One afternoon, while Thomas and Ayanna were repairing a broken section of the fence, Nayeli came to the edge of the field. She approached cautiously, her steps quiet on the dry soil. "Thomas," she said softly, holding up her hands in a gesture of peace. "I have been thinking." Thomas put down the hammer and looked at her, curious. She gestured toward Ayanna and then toward him, her expression serious but gentle. Thomas nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I cannot always be here," Nayeli said. "There are times when my people move through these lands. I want to trust that Ayanna is safe with you. I see how you care for her. I see that she is happy, learning, and protected. That is why I am speaking now." Her words carried weight, and Thomas felt the responsibility settle over him more heavily than ever before. He nodded slowly, feeling both honor and the pressure of the commitment she was placing in his hands. The days grew longer and the seasons slowly changed. Summer heat gave way to cooler winds, and Thomas continued his work, preparing the land for the coming harvest. Yana helped diligently, carrying small baskets of grain and learning to work alongside him. Nayeli remained close, observing, advising, and sharing small pieces of her knowledge about the land, plants, and ways of reading the signs of nature. Thomas learned quickly, appreciating how much he could gain from her experience. One evening, as the three of them sat around the fire after a long day, a sense of calm settled over the farm. Thomas watched the little flames dance in the hearth, casting light on Yana's smiling face and Nayeli's serene expression. He realized that this was more than a passing bond. It was the beginning of a chosen family, one built not by blood but by trust, care, and shared life. In that moment, he felt a depth of connection he had never experienced in his solitary years. But life was never without its tests. One day, while gathering firewood, Thomas noticed footprints leading from the woods toward the farm. They were fresh, and the direction indicated someone had been watching. He quickly called Ayanna back to the house and checked the perimeter of the property. Nayeli arrived shortly after, and together they examined the tracks. She spoke softly, explaining that the patterns were those of settlers who might not understand their relationship. Thomas nodded, understanding that vigilance was now part of their daily lives. That night, as the wind rustled through the trees, Thomas thought about the risks they faced. He had chosen to care for Ayanna, to earn Nayeli's trust, and to embrace a life that was far from simple. Yet he also realized that the love and trust between them made every challenge worth facing. He understood that family was more than safety or proximity. It was responsibility, commitment, and the willingness to face hardships together. In the following weeks, the farm became a place of quiet strength. Thomas reinforced the fences, dug small trenches to guide water from the rain, and ensured the animals were safe at night. Yana learned these skills alongside him, growing stronger and more confident in her abilities. Nayeli continued to teach them both, sharing knowledge of the land, medicinal plants, and the subtle ways to live in harmony with nature. Each day, the bond between the three of them deepened, forming a foundation of trust that could withstand the uncertainties of the frontier. One evening, after the chores were done, Nayeli approached Thomas as he was tending the fire. She spoke in a quiet voice, her eyes meeting his. "Thomas," she said, pausing to choose her words carefully, "I have watched how you care for Ayanna. I have seen your patience, your strength, and your kindness. That is why I am ready to trust you completely. You have become more than a helper. You have become a part of our family." Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest. He understood the meaning behind her words. The responsibility she was placing upon him was great, but so was the trust and honor. Over the next days, life continued with its mixture of work and learning, joy and caution. Ayanna thrived in this environment, her laughter filling the farm, her curiosity growing with each passing day. Thomas felt a profound sense of purpose, understanding that his life, once defined by solitude, was now intertwined with theirs in a way that would last forever. Nayeli's presence provided guidance and wisdom, and together they navigated the challenges of the land, the dangers of strangers, and the uncertainties of frontier life. As the sun set on another day, Thomas stood at the edge of his field, watching Ayanna play near the fence while Nayeli prepared herbs and food nearby. The air was warm, the sky painted in shades of gold and crimson, and a sense of calm settled over him. He realized that life had changed completely since that first day. He helped Ayanna when she fell near his fence. The loneliness that had once filled his home was gone, replaced by laughter, learning, and the slow, steady building of a family chosen not by chance, but by trust and love. That night, as they sat together by the fire, Thomas felt a quiet certainty. He knew that life would not always be easy, that dangers and challenges would continue to appear. But he also knew that together, they could face anything. In that moment, under the soft glow of the firelight, he silently promised himself that he would protect Ayanna, honor Naeli's trust, and embrace this new life with all his heart. The weeks turned into months, and life on the farm grew more settled, yet the challenges of the frontier were never far away. Thomas, Ayanna, and Naeli had learned to live together with care and patience, building routines that made each day meaningful. Thomas's work was harder than ever, but it was different now. The quiet joy of watching Ayanna laugh and learn made each chore lighter. Even the smallest tasks, mending fences, planting seeds, gathering firewood, felt important because they supported this little family. Ayanna was growing quickly, strong and confident, yet still full of wonder. She followed Thomas as he worked in the fields, asking questions about every plant, every animal, and every tool he used. He answered patiently, teaching her not just the mechanics of farm work, but the lessons that came with living on the land. To observe carefully, to respect the animals, to notice the subtle signs in nature. Naeli watched these lessons with approval, sometimes adding her own wisdom about the land, the plants, and the stories that had been passed down through generations of her people. One afternoon, as Thomas repaired the roof of the barn, he noticed a figure moving along the edge of his property. It was a traveler, riding slowly, observing the farm from a distance. Thomas felt a familiar tension tighten in his chest. The frontier was never completely safe, and while most travelers were harmless, there were always those who judged harshly or acted carelessly. He called Ayanna and Naeli to the house, making sure they were safe inside. Naeli approached him quietly, her eyes sharp with concern. She spoke softly, explaining the signs she had learned from her people. The way the traveler's horse moved, the cautious way he looked around, the way he kept his hand near the reins as if ready to defend himself. Thomas nodded, realizing that vigilance was now part of their daily lives. Caring for Ayanna and gaining Naeli's trust had brought new responsibilities, ones that required not only patience and kindness, but also awareness and courage. The traveler eventually passed without incident, and life returned to its quiet rhythm. Yet Thomas could not shake the awareness that the world beyond the farm was unpredictable, and that Ayanna's safety depended on constant care. He spoke with her that evening, teaching her how to notice the small signs around the farm, footprints, broken branches, unusual animal behavior. Ayanna listened carefully, absorbing every word, her eyes bright with determination. Naeli watched silently, a faint smile on her face, proud of both her daughter's eagerness to learn and Thomas's dedication to their well-being. As the months continued, Thomas felt a growing connection to Naeli that went beyond respect. She was quiet, thoughtful, and strong, with a steady presence that complemented his own. He noticed the way she moved gracefully through the farm, how her voice could calm Ayanna instantly, and how her knowledge of the land was unmatched. He began to rely on her guidance, seeking her advice when difficult decisions arose. Slowly, he understood that she was not just a partner in caring for Ayanna, but someone he deeply admired and trusted. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in gold and violet, Thomas and Naeli sat together by the fire while Ayanna played nearby. Naeli spoke softly, her voice carrying the weight of her thoughts. She explained her hopes for her daughter's future, for her safety, and for the possibility of a life that could be stable and nurturing. Thomas listened intently, understanding the significance of her words. He felt the deep responsibility of his role, but also the honor of being trusted so completely. Life on the farm continued to present small challenges. Ayanna fell ill one winter with a high fever, and Thomas stayed awake for nights on end, tending to her, keeping her warm, and bringing her water and medicine. Naeli remained close, helping as she could and offering her own knowledge of natural remedies. Together, they worked to care for the child, and when she finally recovered, Thomas felt a renewed sense of commitment. The experience had reminded him of the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance, patience, and love. Through these experiences, the bond between Thomas, Ayanna, and Nayeli strengthened. They learned to work together, to rely on each other, and to communicate without words when necessary. Small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a shared smile, a nod of understanding, became their language. The farm was no longer just a place to live. It was a home, filled with care, learning, and the quiet comfort of trust. One spring morning, a sudden storm rolled across the plains. Dark clouds filled the sky, and the wind howled, tossing branches and debris across the farm. Thomas immediately secured the animals and called Ayanna and Nayeli inside. As the rain poured down, the three of them huddled near the fire, listening to the storm's fury. Thomas held Ayanna close, feeling the weight of responsibility and the depth of his connection to both her and Nayeli. The storm passed by evening, leaving the land wet and fresh, and the family emerged stronger, bound together by their shared experiences and the resilience they had built. As the seasons turned, Thomas began to plan for the future. He worked to expand the farm, planting more crops and improving the irrigation channels. Ayanna helped as much as she could, learning the value of hard work and perseverance. Nayeli continued to teach her daughter the traditions and stories of her people, ensuring that she grew up connected to her heritage while also learning the practical skills necessary to thrive in this new life. Thomas watched with pride as Ayanna grew strong, curious, and independent, a child shaped by the love and guidance of both the man and the woman who cared for her. Despite their successes, challenges remained. Some neighbors still whispered about the unusual relationship between the farmer and the Apache family. There were moments of tension, small misunderstandings, and cautious glances from strangers. Thomas faced these quietly, relying on patience, honesty, and the strength of his bond with Nayeli and Ayanna to navigate them. He understood that not everyone would approve, but he also knew that their trust in him was more important than the opinions of others. One summer evening, Thomas and Nayeli walked together along the edge of the fields, the sun low on the horizon. They spoke quietly about their hopes for Ayanna, about the future of the farm, and about the lives they had built together. Nayeli's hand brushed his as they walked, and Thomas felt a warmth and comfort he had never known in his solitary years. He realized that the bond they shared had grown deeper than he had imagined, encompassing not just responsibility, but trust, respect, and a quiet form of love. The following months brought small joys, planting seeds in the spring, harvesting crops in the summer, and preparing for the long winter ahead. Ayanna thrived in this environment, her laughter filling the air, her curiosity driving her to learn more about the land and the people around her. Thomas felt a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had helped create a life filled with care, safety, and opportunity for both mother and daughter. One evening, as the three of them sat by the fire after a long day of work, Nayeli spoke quietly to Thomas. Her eyes met his, and he could sense the depth of her thoughts. "Thomas," she said softly, "I have seen how you care for Ayanna. I have seen your patience, your strength, and your kindness. That is why I trust you completely. You have become more than a helper. You have become part of our family." Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest. The responsibility she was placing upon him was immense, but so was the honor. From that moment on, life on the farm took on a new meaning. Thomas embraced his role as protector, teacher, and guide for Ayanna. He respected Nayeli not only as a mother, but as a partner in this shared life. Together, they faced the challenges of the frontier, storms, isolation, and occasional prejudice, with courage and care. Their bond was strong, rooted in trust, love, and the quiet understanding that family is chosen through actions, not merely by chance. As the seasons passed, the farm became a place of growth, learning, and laughter. Ayanna thrived under their guidance, learning both the skills of the land and the wisdom of her mother's traditions. Thomas felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his life, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with meaning, connection, and the warmth of family. Nayeli's trust in him and their shared care for Ayanna had created a life richer than he had ever imagined. The years passed quietly on the farm, and the small family grew closer with each season. Ayanna, now older and more confident, moved with ease among the crops, the animals, and the rolling hills surrounding their home. Her laughter filled the air each morning, bright and unrestrained, and Thomas felt a warmth in his heart that he had never known before. Life had taught him patience, care, and responsibility, but now it also offered joy, companionship, and the profound satisfaction of being needed and trusted. Nayeli observed Yana with pride. She had watched her daughter grow from a small, uncertain child into a capable, curious young girl. She saw the influence Thomas had on Yana, not only teaching practical skills, but also instilling in her patience, kindness, and a sense of security. Nayeli trusted him completely, knowing that he loved her daughter and would protect her no matter the circumstance. Their lives were intertwined, each person supporting the others, forming a family by choice and by heart rather than by blood alone. One morning, as Thomas repaired a section of fence near the far edge of the property, he noticed a familiar figure approaching from the woods. It was a neighbor, an older man who often helped farmers in the area with tools, advice, or labor. Today, he carried a large bundle of firewood, his steps slow but deliberate. Thomas greeted him warmly, and the man nodded in return, his eyes briefly resting on Nayeli and Ayana as they gathered herbs nearby. There was no judgment in the man's gaze, only respect, and Thomas felt a quiet satisfaction. Their family was now part of the community, accepted through actions, patience, and the evidence of care and diligence over time. Later that day, Thomas and Nayeli worked together in the garden, preparing the soil for planting. Yana played nearby, her small hands patting the earth and her fingers following the lines her father drew. Thomas glanced at Nayeli, noticing the quiet pride in her expression, the subtle warmth in her eyes as she watched the child. He realized that their lives, once isolated and uncertain, were now full of rhythm, purpose, and a sense of belonging that reached deeper than he had ever imagined possible. But life, as it always does, brought challenges to test their bonds. One afternoon, a sudden illness struck the livestock, leaving several animals weak and vulnerable. Thomas worked tirelessly, tending to the animals, mending pens, and preparing remedies. Yana watched closely, absorbing the lessons in responsibility and care. Nayeli helped as she could, using her knowledge of plants and natural medicine to assist Thomas. Together, they managed the crisis, and when the animals recovered, Thomas felt a deep sense of relief. He also understood that these challenges had strengthened their connection, teaching them to rely on one another and to face difficulties together. Evenings became moments of reflection and shared comfort. After long days of labor, the family gathered by the fire. Thomas would speak of the day's work, the successes, and the small lessons learned. Iana would recount her discoveries and observations, and Nayeli would share stories from her people, tales of survival, wisdom, and the land. These evenings were more than routine. They were a celebration of life, learning, and trust. Each story, each laugh, each shared meal reinforced the bond between them, forming memories that would endure for a lifetime. One crisp autumn evening, Thomas walked with Nayeli along the edge of the fields, the wind carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant smoke of evening fires. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and orange. Nayeli spoke quietly, her voice gentle but steady. "Thomas," she said, "I have watched you care for Yana. I have seen the patience, the strength, and the love you have shown. You have been part of our lives for many years now, and we have all grown because of it. I want you to know that you are truly her father in every way that matters." Thomas felt a surge of emotion. The responsibility that had weighed heavily on him for years now felt like a gift, a recognition of his dedication and the bond he had nurtured. He looked at Nayeli, understanding the depth of her words, and then at Ayana, who ran through the fields, laughing freely. In that moment, he knew that their family was complete, not because of circumstance, but because of choice, trust, and love. As winter approached, Thomas prepared the farm for the cold months. He repaired the roof, insulated the barn, and ensured that all the animals had food and shelter. Yana helped enthusiastically, carrying small bundles of straw, feeding the chickens, and learning how to store vegetables for the long months ahead. Nayeli guided her daughter in ways Thomas could not, teaching her which herbs could be used for medicine, which plants were safe to eat, and how to read the signs of the changing seasons. Together, they created a household that was safe, nurturing, and resilient. One evening, a strong wind blew across the plains, rattling windows and shaking the trees. Thomas and Nayeli secured the animals and ensured that Ayana was safe inside. The storm raged through the night, but when morning came, the farm remained intact. Thomas stepped outside, breathing in the crisp air, and watched Ayana run toward the field, her laughter rising above the wind. Nayeli stood beside him, smiling, and he realized that the trials they had faced only strengthened the bond between them. They had built more than a farm, they had built a life together. The years continued in this quiet rhythm. Iana grew taller, wiser, and more skilled in the ways of the land. Thomas taught her how to plant, harvest, and care for animals, while Nayeli shared the stories, songs, and traditions of her people. The child learned to navigate both worlds, the practical skills of the settler life and the wisdom of her Apache heritage. Thomas watched with pride as she became independent, thoughtful, and compassionate, a reflection of the love and care both he and Nayeli had poured into her life. Neighbors began to notice the family's harmony. Some approached with curiosity, others with respect, and gradually the small community around the farm accepted them. Thomas felt a quiet satisfaction in this recognition, not for his own sake, but for Iana and Nayeli. Their family, once isolated and cautious, was now part of a larger world, respected for the care, patience, and integrity they had shown. One spring morning, as the sun rose over the fields, Thomas found Iana tending a small plot of flowers near the house. She looked up, smiling, her hands full of soil and petals. "Good morning, little one," he said, his voice warm. She giggled, handing him a small bouquet she had arranged herself. Nayeli watched from the porch, her expression soft with pride. Thomas realized that these moments, simple, quiet, and full of care, were the ones that truly mattered. Later that day, Nayeli approached Thomas again. She stood quietly beside him, looking over the fields, and said, "We have built something important here. Not just a home or a farm, but a family. Iana will grow strong and safe, knowing that she is loved. And that is because of you, Thomas. You chose to care, to protect, and to be part of our lives. That choice has given all of us a future." Thomas felt a deep sense of peace. The loneliness that had defined his early life was gone, replaced by warmth, laughter, and purpose. He had learned that family is not always defined by blood, but by trust, care, and the willingness to stand together through hardship and joy. He looked at Iana, running through the fields, and Nayeli, standing near the porch, and knew that their lives were forever intertwined. As the sun set that evening, casting golden light over the farm, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He remembered the first day he had helped Iana when she fell near the fence, the stormy nights, the challenges with livestock, and the quiet evenings by the fire. Each moment had been a step toward this life, a life full of connection, trust, and love. Finally, under the soft glow of twilight, Thomas knelt beside Iana and Nayeli, placing a hand gently on each of their shoulders. "We are a family," he said softly. Iana smiled, her eyes bright, and Nayeli's expression held pride and quiet joy. In that moment, no words were needed to convey the depth of their bond. They were more than a farmer, a mother, and a child. They were a family chosen by heart, trust, and shared life. From that day forward, Thomas, Nayeli, and Iana continued their lives with courage, love, and resilience. The farm thrived, the seasons changed, and their bond grew stronger with each passing year. Together, they faced challenges, celebrated joys, and nurtured one another. They had built a life full of meaning, purpose, and connection, a life defined not by circumstance, but by the choices they had made and the love they had shared.